Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our Virtual Connect series. We're glad to have you here. We've got a really fun session lined up for today. As always, you get one learning unit for attending today's session. I'm Mike Waldinger, CEO of AI Colorado. And today we're excited to have our architects and young architects of the year from both 2018 and 2019 join us for a panel discussion. A quaint and happier time just 1 or 2 years ago. And I guess you're going to tell us what have you been up to lately. That is kind of it's a very daunting title, as we've heard, to be something of the year. So we know that that's not a fixed point in time, and you've still been doing awesome things, and we look forward to hearing what those are. Now, as always, we want this to be an interactive conversation. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom interface, and we look forward to hearing your questions. As you think of them, put them in that Q&A, and we will get them answered after we go through the formal presentation, and it'll be more interactive in a conversation. I'm going to introduce our panelists and then turn it over to our 2019 Architect of the Year, Bill Moon, to moderate the panel. And I've got to say, I just sat through our jury literally days ago for the 2020 Architect of the Year and Young Architect of the Year and all the service award categories. And it was quite an experience. There's no spoilers at this one. You'll have to stay tuned for the award session itself to find out who won, but it's a very stiff competition. Other than being a great architect and community leader, I think you need to walk on water, see through lead, and be able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. So it was really gratifying to see how many people are worthy of this recognition and how tough it was to just pick one person for each. So without further ado, let's start with Bill, our moderator. Hi, Bill.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining.
Bill has been a member of Triba Architects for over 30 years. As managing principal for the firm, he directs the operations for every discipline, including architecture, urban design, interior design, branding, and experiential design. Bill's committed to the design, adaptive reuse, and redevelopment of structures, systems, in the public realm of the modern city. He focuses on the long-term consequences of urban sprawl, resource management, and the revitalization of urban neighborhoods. We're glad to have you here, and I have to say it was Bill's idea to pull this event together, so we really appreciate that you brought this to the table and got it organized.
Well, happy to be here. Thanks.
Sure. Next we have Nan Anderson. Hi, Nan.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much.
Our pleasure. Well, Nan has been a principal with Anderson Hallis Architects for 30 years and is now the principal dreamer for Freight 910. It's a design and development firm that reimagines industrial sites into community resources. Nan was the 2018 Colorado Architect of the Year and has chaired the Business of Architecture Committee for the past 3 years. We have Ryan Meeks. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, everyone.
Ryan joined SA&R in 2014, where he has a strong background in zoning, planning, neighborhood issues, and construction feasibility through his work on dozens of infill sites in the Denver metro area. His many contributions to shaping the community range from cultural institutions such as the Botanic Gardens to urban residential structures to planning Denver's future at the River Mile. Ryan was the 2018 AI Colorado Young Architect of the Year. And finally, we have Kevin Nguyen. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, everyone.
Kevin is the founder of Regular Architecture, where he's been practicing for the past 12 years with a background ranging from sustainable and affordable housing to commercial architecture. And he's taken those experiences and found a home in hospitality design. Kevin's actively involved in both the ACE Mentor Program for aspiring high school architects and engineers and Colorado Food for Thought, both of which focus on helping our future generations succeed. Kevin was the 2019 AI Colorado Young Architect of the Year. So that is our panel, and we're, again, very pleased to have you share your thoughts with us about where we are today and where we're going as a profession from your vantage point. And without further ado, Bill, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Well, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate everybody joining us. It was kind of a spark of an idea a few months ago about this Architect of the Year and Young Architect of the Year, and what is that and what does it mean? And you kind of go through a submittal process and an award ceremony, and oftentimes that's kind of it. You don't even hear back from them during the year. And we thought, what if we were able to just share a little bit about, who we are, some thoughts we have about the profession currently and where we think it may be going and trending. and really just have a fun dialogue. So um, we thought we'd start off with just a little bit of fun between us, sharing a little bit about ourselves and our background. And kind of, maybe we'll just start, Ryan, with you, asking, what's the origin of you having interest in as potentially being an architect and then evolving into an architect? Can you give us a little bit of your background story?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think for me, being an architect was almost inevitable. I just liked everything. I liked every topic except biology, right? Like everything was interesting: art, history, math, certainly just the cities that are around us. Loved traveling, loved seeing new places, and just being interested in why certain places felt good or were really captivating, and why other places felt bad. Why places were even maybe mysterious, or all those sorts of things. Just very interested in sort of the built environment. My father is actually an architect, and that was probably the main thing that kept me from wanting to be an architect for a long time, because of course, as a kid, you don't want to do what your parents do. But I also saw, he owns a firm. And so I really saw, what it takes to be an architect, from the reality of like being at the dinner table and talking about contracts and contractors and owners and all the people that go into the project. I really didn't even know what design was. It was just what it means to be an architect. So, I really thought I was going to do something kind of different going into college. There was really interesting engineering potential out there, and I thought about computer science and all that type of stuff. And I really remember I went to the engineering orientation at the University of Arizona and was like, I don't think I'm going to have any friends. This is not what I'm interested in. I was like, I love to draw. I love to build things. I like people that are curious and all that type of stuff. And, whatever the architecture building is like, this is it. I just can't do anything else. So that's really how it started, and has been, basically just a love ever since.
Great. That's a great story to hear. Nan, how about yourself and the jackrabbit behind you? Maybe a little story about that as well.
Yeah, actually, like Ryan, I love to build stuff too. I started out as a kid building a lot of tree houses. And I'll never forget this one tree, beautiful, big Japanese crab tree in our yard, probably stretched 50 feet in every direction. And I got 12 friends together and we built 13 tree houses. So we were like little birds in the tree sharing stories. And I think that was my first experience of the intersection between community and architecture. So fast forward to an undergraduate degree in history and art, a master's in fine arts in sculpture, 2 years post-college running an H&R Block tax return business of all places. And I finally, I had that epiphany at age 26 saying, oh my God, I've got all this experience, I've got all these credentials, what on earth do I do with this? And it was on a long drive between California and Colorado when I had that epiphany of, oh, you combine your love of business with your love of building things and you equal architecture. So there I went, and I have never looked back.
That's great. Kevin, tell us about your journey to being an architect.
I think mine's a little bit more abstract in that I don't think I knew what I wanted to do, not even when I was entering my master's program for architecture. In high school, I was sort of all over the place doing a little bit of everything and probably messing around more than I should have been. But in art class, I always was, instead of painting or whatever the task was at hand, I was building models of buildings that I saw and out of balsa wood. And that was sort of the only thing that I would do in that class. And one of my teachers told me that I should look into architecture. And this was before I had even decided I was going to college or anything like that. So it was something I knew nothing about. And I've always been a tinkerer, like building things and model making. And so I just took a leap and went to architecture school at CU. Luckily, when I got to architecture school, I found it was something that I really did love. And through the professors and the students and everything, I found a group of people that I admired and really wanted to be a part of. So I think that was sort of the drive for me. And it's just sort of grown from there, and just met a bunch of incredible people that have helped push me along. I like to think I'm pretty okay at what I'm doing, but I have a lot of fun doing it, which I think is important. So.
And Bill, you have to share your background, your story too.
Yeah. Well, I think mine's a little bit of a hybrid between Ryan and Nan's, where, as a young kid in, 4th, 5th, or 6th grade in Central Ohio, we were out in middle of fields building forts. So I did kind of learn that hands-on crafting. Not very good, but really enjoyed, the actual building. And as I got more and more into junior high and started taking, math and mechanical drafting classes, if you remember those, I really fell in love with the craft of drafting. And it just drove me nuts, though, that we were, doing 3-dimensional drawings of bolts and nuts and things like that. And I just wanted to create something of my own. So I never really even thought of the word architect or architecture, or knew what it really even was. But other than, of course, on the Brady Bunch with Mike Brady being an architect and walking around with a bunch of rolled up drawings. But, the more that I started to, as Kevin said, noodle around on the side on my own in a class, I did have a teacher walk up and say, it's not just all about engineering, but there is a creative side to this as well, and in architecture, and might be something you seriously think about. And it was almost like that night I heard that word, I went home, and there was no internet or anything at that time, but started to go to the library and look at books and read everything I get my hands on. And it just seemed that everything in my DNA pointed towards that. It was a combination of, being able to be around buildings, being creative. The more I get into my career, the more, creative problem solving. There is no instructions oftentimes of what it is we ultimately do. And I just really enjoy that factor of it. So kind of a little bit of a spark here, a little bit of a spark there. And I might be a little bit opposite of Kevin, where I always felt like I was on that path since 8th or 9th grade and never looked back, never had a question about what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. This profession seems to have, from my perspective, really allowed me to do what I think I'm here to do. So with that, why don't we move on and ask the question, that's great about what got us here, but what keeps you here? What's the drive that keeps you getting up in the morning and being excited about being an architect and solving all those fun problems we all get to deal with every day? Kevin, let's start with you.
The trick question. No, obviously it's the movie star fame, right? I mean, everyone thinks we're incredible people. I did.
It's the money, Kevin.
Yeah, the money. No, when I started out, it was totally, the line at the bar. I'm an architect. Don't worry. It worked better than you would think. But
Seinfeld, I'm hearing there. George Costanza's an architect.
It worked well for him too. Didn't take that long to design anything, right? But as I've sort of gotten more and more into architect, when I started, I was working, I'd say for about the 8 years before I started this firm, I was working for a big corporate firm, and I really asked the question a lot: why do I get up and do this? What's the point? I was just sort of reproducing buildings over and over again, doing sort of cookie cutter architecture and not really understanding what I was getting myself into. And had the opportunity about 5 or 6 years ago to work with a restaurateur who was designing a new restaurant here in town. And it was sort of the first glimpse that I got personally of what architecture really meant and what architecture can mean to people. And I think that's what sort of dug me in, and what keeps me going today is this sort of idea of people and the way that they inhabit spaces, and the influence that as architects we can have on how people interact with those spaces. And then pushing that all the way along towards how that space can start to create narratives around different sorts of things. Some of the people that I work with, we're using the restaurants to create a narrative around sustainable food and sustainable culture, and just the types of things that they're selling within their space and using the restaurants themselves to advertise that. And it's really fun to just be a part of that. Everything, you know, from materiality all the way to how we're space planning and designing the kitchens and everything. And I think that's what gets me up in the morning, is just knowing that space influences people, even at a micro level. So it's just fun that way. So.
Great.
I think that's, Evan, I'll just tack on to kind of your point there. I think, you know, especially for young architects, I had some similar experience to you. And, you know, it can be hard when if you're doing work and you don't really know who you're doing the work for, right? You know, maybe you don't really know the client. You don't really know what the motivations are. And so, you know, that's kind of good for all of us. Now that we've got people working for us to make sure that they understand, you know, what we're working together on this. What are we doing? Who are the people? That is what matters. So I think that's a really great thing to keep in mind to make sure that we're all fully engaged in kind of the work that we're creating. That's awesome.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Nan, I'm interested in your thoughts, especially as you've been involved in creating a firm and now evolving into another phase of your professional career. What's driving you these days?
Well, on a really personal level, I have to get up because I'm the day laborer on our site. So I'm the person who supports the framing crew, orders more supplies, make sure that our building permits are in place, doing all the things that a general contractor, all the way down to a day laborer, does. And I'm also the cleanup person, which is, I gotta say, the German in me loves that. But on a more global level, what I'm really interested in these days and what is really driving my current development processes is that going back to that intersection between community and architecture, because I think that in this difficult time in which we're living, that there is a really powerful role that architecture can play in civil discourse. And I think that, you know, I'm not so brazen to think that architecture can solve all of our problems as we kind of thought back in the 1930s. I observed firsthand what happened with Pruitt-Igoe. I grew up in the St. Louis area. But what I do think now is that there's, in civil discourse and architecture's role in that, there's part program, which architects don't always have control over. There's part place, like what is the place that you're offering? Is it a museum? Is it a library? Is it a city hall, hopefully? And then finally, what's the approachability factor? I think as architects, we're really great at designing beautifully detailed, exquisite boxes. But does that foster just people feeling comfortable in the space and sitting down and willing to kind of engage in dialogue that they might not ordinarily engage in? So I'm really looking at how to explore those ideas in the work that we're doing here. And it's really fun.
Yeah. That's really something. You know, from my perspective, you know, I probably had a fairly straightforward traditional career as an architect growing up, you know, learning how to put buildings together and put documents together and seeing it constructed and all the pieces and parts that come with that. But, you know, as I've gotten older and into my career and the firm that I work with continues to grow as well, you know, I find my interest being more about, you know, we've used this word place a lot, but creating that place and, you know, maybe the definition of architecture expanding, that it's not just the building or what's in the building, but I find myself interested in what's the space in between the buildings. And whether that's a street or a plaza or an open space, and it's a small intimate space or a number of spaces that structures come together and share. You know, it's really kind of where I think magic happens. I'm still extraordinarily interested in, you know, the craft and the detailing of an actual structure, don't get me wrong, but I think how we interact as community, as human beings, with a dedicated program or even no program, the space is still there, and we can affect all kinds of issues, as you were alluding to, Nan, that can make people feel great or make them feel really bad. And I do think that we've had, you know, the example you threw up of a really bad example and how that really contributed to, you know, people's lives not being expressive and extraordinary. We have to be careful because I do see our profession becoming very commodity-like. We have publicly traded companies that put out widgets that happen to be homes or retail spaces or hotels. And, you know, we can easily find ourselves running down a path contributing to something that is more about the yield than about the place. And I think that while it's extraordinarily important that financially a project is successful, that's only one aspect, I think, of a project when I look at success. And if we, we've always had this saying that it doesn't matter what the budget is. If it's just an excuse, if what you did isn't extraordinary and really helping people understand and come together as community, because you didn't have the budget and you couldn't put stone on the building, that's an excuse. I really want to be in a place where, in spite of the budget or in spite of the schedule or in spite of the program, we can still do extraordinary work and be proud of that. So that's what drives me today, feeling that I still can contribute to that going forward.
Bill, I love what you're saying about thinking about the spaces in between buildings, because I think that that's absolutely that negative space that we don't often think about that really has power in terms of creating an opportunity for those chance encounters.
Yeah, very, very much so. So, well, if we,
yeah,
sorry,
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna, we could just stay on this topic for the rest of the hour. There's a lot to talk about, but I think what you know, what Kevin talked about and Nan talked about, those are the things that as a profession, that's what matters. I think we're feeling that the people, the community, what that building says about the values of a society that built it, that is really important. And if we don't want to be a commodity, that can't be produced in a factory by an algorithm, right? And so, you know, we need to step up too. We can't just say, hey, the way we've done it for, you know, the last 10 years, or it's the design that I just did down the street and I'm going to do it here again. That probably doesn't have a lot of value. And there's a reason, there's a reason the fees are going down and firms sort of play in that sphere because it is successful. But I think what we're talking about here does have a lot of value. We just need to be serious about it and say that this is part of the profession. And when you come to an architect, that is what you're going to get. You are going to get that critical thinking.
So can I just add on to that, Ryan? Because I think that well, and one of the things that we really focus on are buildings that are all about new spaces, right? New places, new spaces. It's what we do as architects. And I'd like to start to disabuse us of that a little bit, but maybe if you could talk a little bit about you worked on Meow Wolf, right, down in Santa Fe? So that was a great example of taking a really kind of skanky old Safeway building or some kind of grocery store, right, and turning it into something magical. Could you just talk?
We're doing Denver here.
Yeah, but that's a new building, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit about that experience, because it must have been magical in itself?
Sure. You know, that was so the project is, you know, it's under construction right now. It's in the worst site in Denver. It's right in between Auraria Parkway and Colfax. It's crazy. So people have probably driven by and seen it. And you know, so we got the commission for this project and went down to Santa Fe to visit the team, see the facility, and it's a transformational experience. What they're doing down there, it's been copied quite a bit, and you know, we're very excited to see it in Denver here. But it was a very humbling experience, because once we kind of realized just what our role was in that project, it's an immersive experience, right? So there's no windows in the building. There's not a connection outside, and they're designing the world inside, and we're making it work. And it couldn't be a flashy building. Like, that was the last possible thing that it could be. It didn't want to look like the bowling alley, but it needed to have a humility and just kind of strangeness to it. So it was like we were really equal with our client in designing this full experience, from how you arrive at the building to what it means. They have spent a ton of time with the community about what this building means for the Sun Valley community. So, you know, that we were really brought along on that journey, and sort of made to see a new way of like how a thing is built in a community, what it means for the arts in Denver, what it means for entertainment in Denver, what it means to just put a thing on a site and have traffic and all of that. And they were just very sensitive to all these things in a way that said, you know, okay, it wasn't our job to kind of worry about the aesthetics of the building. Yes, it's the detailing. Yes, it's all that stuff. But they sort of flipped us on our head, and that has been just for me and the people on that team, it has been the best experience. I mean, we have connected with them, and it's really given us something to look forward to, and giving Denver something to look forward to go have fun at, and hopefully by the end of next year. But yeah, it was a humbling process, and something we're trying to find a way to work into other projects.
Ryan, that's a great segue to the next question I'd like to throw out to the panel here. We've talked about this a little bit on some prep calls, but you know, the conversation that we've all been having here leads me to think that there's some type of call to action that we're experiencing as architects and in this profession, where we are today in society, and you know, the unique skill sets that we have in our profession. You know, how can we take that and should we take that experience and skill set and bring that into the community, not just through what it is that we do every day of architecture and building places and that we've kind of talked about, but are there other opportunities that we as architects should be doing in our community, whether it's, you know, affecting policy or just being, you know, elected officials and leaders in our communities? Where do you see architecture and architects in particular, where can we put our best skill sets forward in community going forward? I'll throw it out to whoever feels passionate about taking that one on.
Well, I'll just say, I mean, architects we're thoughtful, we're creative, we're empathetic, we're problem solvers, we're honest. Sounds like the type of people we could use some leadership from right now. You know, we certainly lack a little bit of diversity in the background of our experience, and I think we've learned a little bit about that this year, as we have a long way to go to truly understand the communities that we're working in. But, you know, I think it would just help for people to understand kind of design as an aspect of how our cities get built, right? And people think, oh, Denver has been this like development explosion, or they have certain ideas about how things get made or how things happen. That generally isn't correct. There's a lot of policies, maybe well-intentioned policies that work for some time that really don't work right now. A lot of things are changing this year, and the type of places that we're going to need to build, it's not just the work, right? We're all fighting it a little bit on individual projects, whether it be with the city or with expectations or a number of different ways, depending on the project that we're working on. But it does say you have a responsibility to say that this policy or the way that the city is doing something isn't going to work. We're not going to get there. another affordable housing project just died in 5 points on my neighborhood because it didn't have enough parking, right? I mean, how much can we beat our head against the wall about this topic, right? So that I think that one hit me again this week, and it's like it just demands we have to show up to meetings. We have to do a little bit more to put that voice out there.
Bill, can I throw that question back at you too? Because I think that if you look at the arc of your career, I have to wonder, and you worked exquisitely in the urban realms. Is all of our process that we've layered on over decades improving things, or are we not improving things?
It's a great question, and I struggle with that every day, Nan. And I kind of would, echo some of the frustration I hear in Ryan's voice. Is I know some of our, both of our firm's projects feel like we drown in bureaucracy and spend an enormous amount of time and energy just getting things, approved and trying to educate some of our elected officials as to why certain things are important and certain things are not. I go back to, Federico Pena's Imagine a Great City, and, trying to put a vision out there to the citizens and saying, we're all here. There's a place here that's pretty special. And if we don't get this right, we can screw it up pretty good. And there's certainly been examples of that over history of Metro Denver doing some really bad development and planning and doing some really good development and planning. And I think that, for the most part, people's minds and hearts are in the right places. It's not because we want to make things nicer. There are certain things that, in fact, we want to protect and hold sacred. And, that's this real constant challenge we see of, there's, places within the city that I think should be developed. Other people think it should be a park and open space. And, what is the right thing for our community? I think we're battling that right now at, say, Park Hill Golf Course, classic example of, really an underutilized space for most of its history, in a really important and growing part of town that touches a number of really interesting neighborhoods and infrastructure. And we can decide that it's throwaway space and leave it as a glorified detention pond. We can look at it and say it should be developed and part of our urban fabric that's growing and take advantage of all the infrastructure and billions of dollars that we put there. Or, we can put it to the side and say it's meant to be open space. And, I think we really need a serious community debate with serious leaders that, what is the right thing, for our community? How do we see our community evolving? Not only on the sociology and economy standpoint, but in the physical place. I think a lot of people are attracted to Denver and Colorado because of our physical place, and we want to stay here and enjoy it and protect it. And, a lot of those amazing spaces are rapidly changing and evolving. And I know people are frustrated by that, wondering, how did this happen? And that's where I guess I'm asking, I'm asking that question, is our training and education and skill sets something that we as a profession can lend and ought to lend more towards that debate and dialogue versus staying in our boxes and doing our job. And it's, that's enough, right? We all know what it takes to get a project going, and the energy and dollars and sweat and tears that go through that. It's a lot, and it takes a lot of energy out of you. So to imagine doing that plus something else on top of that is almost overwhelming. But I do think that as I said, Dan, there are good intentions that people are trying to do on the public policy side, but boy, when Ryan's example of, not enough parking for affordable housing, so the project craters in, something's just gotten out of kilter. And I think that's maybe our voices ought to start being louder as a profession in those instances. Kevin, any words of wisdom to share with us?
I don't think I have anything super valuable to add, but I agree with what you guys are saying. There's a lot of bureaucracy that I've dealt with in tons of different stages, and it's frustrating. I just wish I had a better answer for how we can help move that along.
So Kevin, I'm wondering if diversity and obviously getting young people really interested and engaged in our profession from diverse backgrounds is part of the answer. Do you think?
I don't think it hurts. I mean, that's definitely something, I've looked at a lot throughout sort of just because of my background. I grew up in Colorado. I grew up in sort of a lower income neighborhood in Aurora. Was lucky that my parents drove me to one of the better schools a few miles away. And I was able to make a lot out of what I had. And, a lot of my friends and different things like that you see. And, we have these discussions about the gentrification in Denver and all these different pieces. And I ask myself questions about them a lot and how I can impact those pieces. And I think that's probably one of my biggest focuses as I've become an architect here, is that I'm focusing or trying to focus a lot more on the younger generation and getting them excited about architecture, because I do think building and design has an incredible power to shape our world and how we interact with it. One of the main focuses of my company, Regular, is we really want to focus on bringing design to everybody. So, growing up where I was, when I say that I'm an architect, all of my friends just say, "Oh, so you just hang out with rich people all day and build their houses?" And I really want this idea of what an architect does and what an architect is to be a little bit more spread out. This idea that architecture is for everybody and good spaces for everybody, good design is for everybody. Really going back to what Bill talked about early on, is a budget's not an excuse. There's tons of materials, tons of ways we can detail things, and ways we can design spaces that there's opportunity for everybody. And I think it's sort of simple in that way, in that I think doing a good job lends itself towards more positivity. In my mind, a lot of the super negative restrictions and requirements come from people who don't understand. So there's a lot of education around that. And I think, when I was doing a lot more sort of ground up projects, those were the discussions I was having with the city. Was, I understand why you're doing what you're doing and why you've gotten to where you are. But can we look at it from a different way? Parking for affordable housing is one of the ones that, we're building affordable housing for people who, are struggling. They probably don't have cars. So maybe a little bit less parking is going to make that okay.
Or even if they do have cars, is that the most important thing that we should focus on versus shelter? Maybe we can solve the car problem in different ways. And again, that's where I'm kind of throwing that out, saying, if you read the code in black and white, it says you need X amount of parking spaces, and how come you don't have it? Sometimes it's boiling down to that much, versus how we might think, which is, well, let's get creative and solve this issue through, maybe we look at car share programs, we look at mass transportation, we look at off-site parking issues. There's different ways to look at this to negotiate, I would hope, going forward. And, if we're able to have an audience that is maybe more open-minded than just it's black or white, it's yes or no. If you're not going to, create the recipe exactly this way, then the answer is no. And I think that we all come to this from a very creative way of thinking. And I guess that's where I'm asking, is if we're having audiences that just aren't creative in the way of thinking, can we insert ourselves as professionals into those areas and affect change so that we could be the open-minded audience?
Yeah, great question, Bill. And I'm just thinking about, cars, the subject of cars, which is the bane of our existence, it seems, throughout our careers. But I'm wondering if anyone has done any studies yet during our pandemic period as to what's happening in cities with vis-a-vis traffic these days. Is it increasing because we're using mass transit less? Is it decreasing because we're all sitting on Zoom meetings all day long? Because it's such vital evidence for what we've also been talking about, which is how will the footprint of the city change as we deploy more self-driving cars or have better mass transit, or whatever the future solution is.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. When you
Yeah,
look at
dropped
land,
off.
sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh, sorry, Bill. At least like the statistics I saw, traffic dropped off precipitously, right around March 13th when we all started staying home. So there was quite a big dip, and I mean, it sure feels like it's back to normal. I don't know how that is at this point. Maybe that's why things are still spreading. But the other thing that we saw was, some really positive things, like the city, closing 16th Street, 11th Street around town so people can get to the parks, right? There's tons of space in City Park. There's like nobody in there. I'm lucky to live over by that park. But Cheeseman is just packed, right? People can't get across the city safely on a bike, right? So having those corridors really helped. The outdoor cafe, taking parking to allow businesses to do outdoor cafe, extending that through Halloween now, that's awesome. Those are really great outcomes that show, our city can be flexible, when push comes to shove. And I hope some of those things stick around, and we all remember that we really liked riding our bikes for a couple months. If we were able to buy one. Bike sales have gone crazy this year, so that another positive aspect. But
if you look at just pure land use set aside as a community, and admittedly it's over many generations, the pure amount of land set aside for roads and transportation and parking of vehicles is significant. And when we look at we have to keep sprawling in order to build, and density's bad. It's a big picture question. Are we using our land in the proper ways? And, are there examples and experiments, pilot projects, where we can look at a 16th or an 11th, or even when you go to Cherry Creek North, on 2nd Avenue, they've taken over some of the parking spaces for outdoor dining. My sense is that it's time to look at these pilot projects, and not just, oh, well, we tried it and we went away, but at some point, can we actually change our physical place and really look at land in a different way? If we don't have land enough to house people, is that a secondary need to moving cars and parking cars around our city? And I think that dialogue needs a serious look at it. And again, I think as architects and planners and designers, we're set up to not only ask those questions, but give people tools to look at different options. Here's how your city can start to look and feel. I haven't heard too much about other cities like what is Aurora or Lakewood or Broomfield or even Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, if they're adopting some of these pilot projects. But I certainly hope they are looking at those and asking themselves the same question, are we using our land in a right way? And just because that's the way it's been for the last 50 or 100 years, is it time to relook at how we're using our land structure, and how do we look at these things? I read a great article the other day about a number of priests and pastors and rabbis around the country who are looking at their own assets. If you think about every church in the country or synagogue, and how much land is set aside for asphalt parking of cars, and they're starting to ask themselves, saying, why are cars important when we can't even house people and take care of people? We should be looking at that asset of all this asphalt, and that's where we should be building affordable housing. And I think there's going to be those kinds of questions, I think, are very relevant. And I'm hoping as a profession we can start to be the ones that can put the tools in place to show people what community can look like going forward.
I think the other thing that's going to drive that too is obviously our climate change challenge. And it was really interesting listening to, I guess it was a program of AIA a couple of weeks ago, talking about the number of firms that have signed up for the 2030 challenge. Typically over the last 10 years or so, it's been in place since 2009, has been 2 to 3 firms a year, which is pretty paltry really. But within this last year alone, I think that the statistic was 12 firms. So, you know, it's taking that kind of commitment at home, so to speak, to really make a difference in our communities as well. We have to model what we want to see.
That's a great point. Very
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah,
So
we signed up and then, yeah, it felt like, yeah, sorry, Bill. Yeah, we signed up this year and it felt like, you know, you almost feel like not even worthy to just sort of say, okay, I'm even just gonna like make that first step because we're so far off from being there. But I think it does take that first step. And kind of some of the things we were talking about earlier, it is a really serious thing. It just like the spaces in between the building, just like the people that we're doing it for, that aspect is truly for everybody, right? So it's important.
Yeah. Well, if we took this dialogue and asked ourselves, we've talked about kind of our background in the past and kind of current conditions that we're facing now. What do you think our profession looks like going forward? What do you think the architect of the future is going to be doing? What passion ought somebody to think about as an architect going forward?
I personally hope that the architect is led design build profession will kind of regrow. Obviously it was decimated in the 2008-2009 recession, but I think that if we're going to really be able to control the reins from start to finish, it's going to come from architect-led design build to a great extent. Obviously that's not the full answer, but I think it's part of the answer.
Kevin, any thoughts?
For me, I think that the architecture of the future is unfortunately even more sort of broadly based in their knowledge, and I think more involved in their community in that way. I mean, it's something, you know, I try and push in the way that I'm doing it, and it being involved with our youth, basically. I'm involved, like we said in my intro, I'm involved with the ACE mentoring program here in Colorado, which I lead a school in Aurora where we have about 25 students a year that we teach for 16 weeks about architecture, engineering, construction, and all the different fields, and try and get them involved in understanding of what that is. And it's something I wished I had when I was growing up. I think it may have made my answer to that first question a little bit more solid and clear. But we try and get them to know what architecture is and the value that there is with architecture from a young age. And then along with that, I run another program called Immersion Workshop, where we meet yearly with a group of architects of varying ages and discuss these ideas that, you know, some of the stuff that we're talking about, but just the site and its importance on architecture, context of architecture. Where are we building? What are we building? Why are we building? And what impact does that building have on the space that we're in? But to me, it's education. I think it's the most important piece. And how can we educate people at all levels and continue to educate them as they grow? I think maybe it was on one of the other calls that we were on, but just this idea is the second you stop learning is probably when you stop growing. So, you know, just that constant push towards education, starting at a very young age and, you know, having these conversations with people, you know, hopefully, you know, with our attendees on this list, at least one or two are going to go talk about some of these things we're talking about to the next person. And, you know, it may not be somebody on the city council tomorrow, but I think it'll eventually happen.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think these are really good thoughts here. You know, I sort of think of there's some things that we're, you know, moving away from the past, which are really great, and then maybe a few things that we kind of lost that we need to bring back. I mean, certainly the kind of the idea of the architect is the singular ego, the Frank Lloyd Wright that sort of everybody thinks of as an architect. That sort of got dismantled into a more collaborative environment, right? You know, kind of in the time that I've been working, which is great. But at the same time, you know, Nan, we do sometimes come in after all of the other important pieces in the project have come into place, and there's only so much you can do if you know, the fix is in, you know, and the architect comes in at the last possible point. We are one of the few professions, just empathetic people, that are able to connect with our community from a social standpoint, from a historical standpoint, from a land use standpoint, from a design standpoint. And we just don't use that right now. I think that's a way for us to kind of go back and say there is something that architects can provide or bring society, and it's not about a visual image or, you know, organic architecture, whatever the design movement might be, but it's about the world's got a lot of problems that we need to solve in the next 10 years, or we're going to have a lot more problems, right? And, you know, we can do that. I think it requires letting go a little bit of some of the stuff that we've done in the past. You know, maybe we need to think about how do we simplify the work that we're doing, right? How do we get more efficient in the work that we're doing, so that we can focus on these issues, which are what really matter, and not whether that inset part of the building is blue or green, right? I don't have any patience for that anymore, especially this year when time is precious. So yeah, thanks, Gavin. Yeah, we can all, I get sick of saying that around the office, but you know, I think we're, you know, hopefully a new wave of young architects can come in and really push just our power that's been sitting here for a long time untapped. So
Yeah, I think
Well said.
I was just going to say, sort of tagging on that, this idea of efficiency, and I think something that's come with our sort of digital age is this incredible efficiency, just in the way that we're producing work and doing work, and it should give us more time to focus on some of these more important and impactful things. Should. Yeah.
That was the promise of Revit, Kevin, and before that CAD, and before that pin bars.
The problem is that we did get more efficient, but what we did, instead of focusing on more, you know, impactful and social issues, is we took on more work.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
More complicated designs.
pages to 300 pages, right?
Yeah.
I want to do that old set, please. I want to.
That's the dream.
No, we can't go.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I seem to, I don't remember in my younger career sitting in just normal meetings and lawyers were in the room. But boy, seems like a lot more meetings these days involve attorneys for whatever reasons. And it's almost like, God forbid, if there's an entitlement process you've got to go through. You can, I mean, Ryan, I know you've experienced this as well. You know, you might as well tack 18 to 24 months onto a normal project schedule if you've got to go through any kind of rezoning or negotiate now with Dottie or Host or whatever division. Parks and Rec's another one popping its heads up, having fun. So, you know, I really do feel in a certain way, understanding land use law has become, I mean, we have clients that come to us and they expect us to know that. And, you know, because first off, we charge less hourly than an attorney does. You pay an architect $200 an hour versus an attorney $600 an hour to get to the same conclusion. Tell me what the zoning I can do and not do. So I think just, I don't know whether that's a fortunate or unfortunate thing in our profession of dealing with the legalities of development now. You know, the more you know that's just a reality of what's happening out there. So, well, I think with that, we've got 5 minutes left. If we could ask Mike to come back in and open up maybe Q&A to the audience. We'd love to hear thoughts and questions that you might have and what this group can do to perhaps share our thoughts.
Yeah, so if you're still with us, we hope you've enjoyed the dialogue and it's prompted some questions or comments, and we hope to hear from you on those. At least for me, it's been an enlightening conversation. I think most of us could just watch you guys talk to each other and ask each other questions for, you know, a couple more hours, because you've had so many varied experiences and so many ways of approaching problems from a variety of scales and project types that it's nice to just to nerd out a little bit on watching architects who are really accomplished talk to each other. So I appreciate that. I'll start with a question, or maybe an observation. So we talk a lot about getting more people into the architecture profession, especially from populations that aren't as represented as we'd like them to be today. Maybe we need to have more forts and tree houses and balsa wood distributed to a younger age group, because I really liked how that was part of you were doing architecture without even knowing you were doing it at a young age, and that spark of creativity was then called out later. And then the follow-up to that would be, let's educate school guidance counselors and K-12 teachers on what the architecture career is, because if not for some of those educators pointing out that, the architects do what you seem to be interested in, it may never have happened.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I know here, our firm will be doing a big announcement coming up in the next week or so to address exactly that. We're going to put a big challenge out to our peers to not only treasure, but time. If we don't see ourselves as active recruiters for the next generation of architects, we won't have a next generation of architects. There's so much other areas that people can go into that are just as fascinating. But if we're serious about what it is we believe in and want people to affect change in our society through physical building, I think maybe we ought to take that mantle on and be a little bit more recruiters, and not just in certain areas, but across the board. And we should get into neighborhoods that maybe that's not the first thing they've ever thought of, or have no exposure to it, but their neighborhoods are the ones that are rapidly evolving and changing, and what can they do about it to make it a great place? And I think that we should just be more proactive. I'll leave it as simple as that.
Yeah, Kevin, what you're doing, actually being in schools, is a huge part of that. And then Ryan, as you up the stakeholder engagement earlier on in the project, and not at the end when you're unveiling the design, that tells people that there is something there that they can contribute to. And once they know what an architect is, the saying is, if you don't see one, you don't know you can be one. So you have to get in front of the population doing what it is you like to do most, and then spark that interest. So I know there's a lot of efforts underway. The college here is doing some great work on outreach, but the other point of that is not just getting people into schools, but there's got to be a career waiting at the end of it. And a lot of folks get that initial interest in joining a studio and going to architecture school and don't make it all the way through. So we've got to figure out how to, as you said, Bill, have not just the scholarship fund ready and full and waiting for them, but there's got to be a meaningful job at the end of that process too.
Yeah, a meaningful
say
job.
Right now when hiring is not great, but
a meaningful job, and someone who's willing to mentor them along the way. Every successful architect I've known has been mentored, typically very unstructuredly, by someone who really cares about them as a person and as a future contributor to the profession. So we all have to keep that top of mind too. That's
a great point.
Yeah, mentorship. It's something that I know that, in a lot of the places I worked beforehand, we saw a lot of, we want to hire people with the most possible experience, et cetera, and I just value so much those people who kind of picked me up by bootstraps and just, told me the things I didn't need to know. I'm going to make fun of myself here a little bit, but I just remember my first job site visit, and I excitedly pointed at a backer rod. And I was like, holy crap, that's what a backer rod is. And everyone laughed at me, but at the same time, if someone hadn't taken me onto the job site to see that, I would still be drawing a circle with a couple of half moons next to it and not know what the heck I'm doing. So there's value in every one of those little pieces.
So let's see what we got on the Q&A here. Jennifer asks, can the panel talk about the balance between the responsibility of moral stewardship in the profession versus lack of real incentive to keep fighting? Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, it's the
Well,
right way to ask the question because these are all fighters.
Yeah, that's a really, really powerful question and has a lot of tentacles to it. You know, I think that as architects, we have to hear, just by our exposure, we have to develop pretty thick skins because there are a lot of times when we hear no. So that certainly helps kind of armor us for those kinds of situations. But it's kind of like what Ryan was talking about at the very beginning. You see a goal in your life, you know that you're destined for it, and you're just going to keep pushing. Will we always win? Absolutely not. So we just have to be ready for that. And as I am a true believer in, never take ourselves too seriously, because there's a lot out there in life that is very serious, but we shouldn't be too serious about ourselves.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, that's an amazing question, and it's probably the crux of what we all experience every day. You know, a few things can come up. One is, you know, if it's something that is just morally against everything you know about, there's nothing preventing you from resigning the commission. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not just going to go to the next group and the same thing gets built, but that's one really tough thing, to resign a commission. The other thing that we've and we see this oftentimes, and you know, it's usually something related to cost, and oftentimes it's going to go back to, well, I'd love to be environmentally sustainable, but it's too expensive, so no, we can't do that, even though we know it's the right thing to do. So, you know, there are programs out there that you can make your client aware of that can assist in cost. And, you know, that we have found that extraordinarily valuable, that, you know, a client's, you know, an architect's going to help me solve a cost issue. Really? Wow. That's really something pretty special. And then, you know, there's certainly what it is we ultimately try to do, which is be creative, solve the problem. Don't just take no for an answer, but take that as a challenge and really work it. And if it's something you deeply believe in, come back with alternative solutions that potentially could be, whether it's optioned or perhaps a building can be built so that in the future, the mechanical system can be changed out, whatever it is, and or new technology can be added to shade the glass or whatever the issue is. So it's something I know we all struggle with every day. It's not going to go away. It's probably only going to get harder. And I would just say, you know, I think where Nan is going is also stay true to yourself. At the end of the day, that's who you've got to answer to. Yes, you have a responsibility to your clients. Yes, you have a responsibility to the greater public, but you also have a responsibility to yourself.
Anybody else want to dare to take that one on? Well, I'll just say what I've observed just watching architects, and we worked with a professor at a university on studying how architects, the architect profession was his case study for how called professionals, that was his term, not ours, called professional, people who feel called, deal with stress. And there's been a lot of scholarship on challenge stressors and hindrance stressors, and just very briefly, hindrance stressors are things that you can't control, but you have to deal with. It's a black or white. You must do this because someone said it, a government or your boss or something, and there's no reason to, it would be a total waste of time to question why that hindrance is there. It's just there. Challenge stressors are, it's going to take your intellectual capacity and fortitude to work around that problem, and you have some control over the outcome. And what this research paper found was that those who feel called, and architects were the stand-in for a called professional, are much more able to deal with the challenge stressors. In fact, take energy from solving the challenge stressors. However, they really hate the hindrance stressors because they also want to question those too. So I think if you can focus on the things, it's almost like that cliche of the serenity prayer, you know, focus on the things you can control, what you have the skill set to deal with, and just dig into those, because society has a value for people who can do that.
And surround yourself with people that believe the same thing. It's kind of easy to look at news right now and feel like things are being rewarded that were not acceptable 10 years ago. So, you know, if you're in an environment where you're not getting that kind of mentorship, or you're seeing that behavior modeled, maybe it's not who you work with, but as people associated with the work that you're doing, that's negative as well. I mean, doing the right thing is doing the right thing for itself, right?
Yeah, that's great, Ryan. I would echo saying, you know, surround yourself with people that inspire you, and you'll find yourself inspiring them, and suddenly you've got a really amazing group of people that almost, I think that your comment earlier, Mike, about, we actually gain energy out of that is true. There's nothing like, having an insurmountable problem and a bunch of people around the table that have to solve that problem, and amazing ideas come out of that, and invariably something moves forward.
Well, this is a group that we have been pleased to surround our members with who can inspire them. So we're really grateful for each of you. Thanks for joining us today. I don't want to make any distinction between Architect of the Year and Young Architect of the Year. I just want to say Nan, Ryan, Kevin, Bill, all of our most recent award winners, thank you for all you do to advance the profession. I don't know if it changed how you perceive yourself or how others perceived you to get this recognition, but we hope that it's given you more confidence. You can hold your head up a little higher and walk a little taller, and have a platform to say what you believe, because we have given you that endorsement to say, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's more in that progression who are being formed and doing great things every day. You'll hear about the next round of our award winners at our Design Awards and Service Award celebration. That's coming up very soon, August 17th. The registration is on the website. You can participate in two ways. We'll be live streaming, and we'll be in person at the Drive-In Theater in Denver, Colorado. So lots of capacity and lots of fun planned for that. So we hope you'll sign up and see who is next in line to help lead the profession and get the recognition that they deserve. As always, stay tuned for more Virtual Connects in the weeks ahead. And thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks all.
Thank
Good seeing
you.
you.
Thanks.